Is it the big issue for you when it comes to your ballot in Vote 2024? Immigration leapt into the headlines locally when Jacksonville's mayor made this statement.
Put people in what would really amount to a concentration camp type situation to round them out of the country doesn't seem to me to be a very American thing to do.
Other voices in the city pushed back, including the top law enforcement officer. We're getting reaction from the sheriff and connecting with federal lawmakers as the election cycle rolls into the final 2 weeks on This Week in Jacksonville. Thanks for being with us today. Local politicians are getting some international attention, all surrounding comments on illegal immigration policy initiated by Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan. She's referring to the plan Donald Trump introduced called Operation Aurora. It would invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, authorizing a president to relocate, arrest, or deport anyone older than 14 who comes from a country that is at war with the United States. Mayor Deegan made this statement during an interview with Times Radio in London when the host said many people in America favor mass deportations.
I would just say that Jacksonville and the United States as a whole is we are a community and a nation of immigrants, and I would hope that people would say yes, we absolutely must fix the broken immigration system. Let's pass a tough border law, but to put people in what would really amount to a concentration camp type situation to round them out of the country doesn't seem to me to be a very American thing to do.
Okay. I mean, the use of the term concentration camp is loaded. You consider that's completely justified?
Well, if you're what would we call them? If you're rounding people up and putting them in camps, what would we call those? It's a concentration of people that are in a camp. I'm not suggesting anything beyond that, but I think it seems rather inhumane to me.
Right.
Well, reactions seemed to begin with Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters, but it included pushback from Republican city council members and support from Democrat city council members. Waters issued a statement and then spoke with News4Jax in person.
We've seized about 15 kilos of fentanyl just this year, enough to kill 7 million people. 7 million people in this country. So for people to say that rounding them up and putting them in concentration camps to it's almost a comparison to the horrific things that took place in Nazi Germany and across the world in World War II to an issue where people actually come into the country illegally and dealing with an issue that everyone in America knows is a real issue. And to hear that was just pretty shocking. So I felt like I should say something.
And Sheriff Waters told our City Hall reporter Ashley Harding that he'll have no problem putting this behind him when the mayor returns and that he believes that they work well together. Donald Trump's campaign spokesperson says Mayor Deegan should resign. All right, so this week I spoke with Congressman Buddy Carter, who represents our viewers in Southeast Georgia. Immigration was one of our topics. But Florida early voting begins this coming week, and Georgia's early voting polls are already open. We are closing quickly on the nation's general election.
Well, I'm feeling good. I feel like the momentum is on our side. I think it's on President Trump's side. I think it's on the Republican side. We owe our veterans so much, and they're the reason that we enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy. But perhaps the greatest freedom we have is the freedom to vote and elect our leaders. And this is something we should take advantage of. This is something we should exercise, if for no other reason, to thank our veterans for their service to our country and for giving us this freedom to vote.
Obviously, Georgia is a key state among the swing states that will ultimately decide the election when it comes to who's going to the White House to serve there. When you look at what happened, even on the very first day of early voting in Georgia, setting records there, is that encouraging?
It is very encouraging. I've been saying, come hurricane or high water, we're going to vote. And I think people in Georgia want to vote this year. I think that we want to prove, and particularly conservatives, and particularly on the Republican ticket, that 2020 was an anomaly, and that, people are saying we're a swing state, and I get where you can make that argument, but, every one of our statewide elected officials is Republican, with the exception of our 2 senators. So I would submit to you that we're still a red state, perhaps trending purple, but at the same time, we're still a Republican state.
Lots was made out of the election results of 2020, even litigation going on still about that. We heard Brad Raffensperger this week, the Secretary of State there, over all the elections saying we're going to have a good election here. Do you have confidence in that?
Well, I do. I have confidence that it's going to be better than it was in 2020. And the primary reason for that is because the Georgia State Legislature passed the Election Integrity Act, which makes voting easier and cheating harder. And I applaud them for that. I think that was a good move. I think that they have made improvements to the voting system. And I think that the Elections Board continues to make improvements. So my confidence level in this being an accurate and fair election is much higher this time.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what our two states, Georgia and Florida, have experienced recently, and that's disaster with hurricanes, Hurricane Helene and then Hurricane Milton. And it kind of became a political talking point because of questions about the availability of resources from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. How do you feel about what FEMA's doing? And FEMA is saying, hey, we are going to be able to respond to the needs of the people in Georgia and in Florida.
Well, first of all, look, I've lived in South Georgia all my life, and this Helene was the most devastation I've ever witnessed. I've never seen anything really close to it. Georgia Power said that it was the most destructive storm they've ever seen. People are on edge right now. I think FEMA is probably doing the best that they can right now. There are still some people, even in our district, who still don't have power and are not looking to have power for perhaps another month or so. That's a long time to go without power, but it was such a destructive storm. We had over 8,000 poles that were down. I went to the staging area and visited some of the line workers. They were telling me it takes 2.5 hours to replace one pole. And that's a lot of work, over 1,000 miles of wire that had to be replaced. Just the devastation alone. But I'm confident that we're going to be able to, that FEMA is going to be able to deliver, and that they're going to be there when we need them.
We heard even earlier this week that the president was saying, hey, the money will come in even if we have to wait until Congress is back after the election. Is that something that you would support, more money for disaster relief if needed?
If needed, absolutely. But let me be clear, before we left in September, when we passed the continuing resolution, we also included $20 billion for FEMA. Only $1 billion of that has been spent. If we need to go back, I'm willing to go. I'll get on a plane right now and go back to appropriate more if we need to, but I don't think we're going to need to. Now, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, is out of funds, and we need them to be replenished. And if we need to go back and vote for that, then I'm going to insist that we do that. But at the same time, FEMA's budget is different from other agencies because you can't just budget an amount for FEMA. We don't know what the disasters are going to be. So we just have to base it on the year before, and then, we may have to fill in more if we need to, depending on how many disasters we have.
Congressman, when it comes to this election coming up here, immigration policy is certainly something that's been back and forth. Where do you stand on this? And are there some policies that you would like to see instituted regardless of who goes to the White House when inauguration happens in January?
Absolutely. And those policies would be the policies of the Trump administration before he left office. The Remain in Mexico policy, build the wall, making sure that we are halting people from coming in here. You hear various numbers about how many illegals are in this country, anywhere from 16 to 21 million. But regardless of what it is, we're not naive enough to believe that some of those aren't coming across that border with the intent to hurt us and to do bad things. That's what we got to be careful of. Plus, we have to remember the illegal drugs that are flowing across that country. The number one cause of death now in this country for those between 18 and 40 is fentanyl poisoning. We've got to stop those drugs coming across that border. It's infesting all of our communities.
The Vice President Harris campaign has made it a point to say, hey, there's got to be a difference between, yes, securing the border and humane treatment of the people who are coming across the border. How would you reconcile that?
Well, look, we all want people to be treated humanely. I don't think that's a partisan issue. Of course, we want them to be treated humanely. And I would submit to you that with that border not being secure, that it's inhumane, because they are risking their life coming up here to cross that border. And many of them that are being abused and sexually and in other ways physically. that in itself is inhumane. So to secure that border, I think, would be a more humane situation for everyone.
On the topic of maybe economic opportunity, the Harris campaign reaching out even this week to Black voters and saying, hey, we've got an agenda here that will help there. We know lots of reaching out to the Latino community as well recently. But there's also data that says President Trump's campaign has earned a lot of support in both of those communities. Is that a key part of these final 2 weeks, getting those votes?
I think it is. I think it is a key part of it. And look, and regardless of what the color of your skin is a job, and people want to work, and they want to have the opportunity to achieve the American dream of being successful and having a job and providing for their families. And that's why the economy is such an important part of this election coming up. You know, I always say elections have consequences because policies have consequences. And this election is about policy. Forget about all the noise about he said this about her, she said this about him. Concentrate on policy. If you look, the Trump policies worked when he was in office. Inflation was at 1.4%. Now look at it. Yes, it's down to 2.4%, but what is it cumulative over the last 4 years? Over 20.5%. People are hurting now. People have less money in their pocket than they did before. They're trying to decide whether to buy gas or buy groceries. That's not a good situation, and that's why policies matter.
All right, so 16 days until the election, and we're getting more information for voters this morning. An ardent supporter of the vice president's campaign. We're talking with a man who appeared on the stage at the Democratic National Convention. Congressman Joaquin Castro will chime in, offering his perspective on the presidential race. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro arrived on the national stage during the general election campaigns a dozen years ago. And since then, the Democrat has served in the U.S. House of Representatives. I spoke with him about his support for Kamala Harris and the issues he sees as most important to the nation.
Well, Vice President Harris, throughout her career, has been a remarkable public servant. But most of all, in this campaign for president, she's clearly the better choice. In fact, she's the only one with a plan, really, Kent, for almost anything. You know, she's talked about building an opportunity economy for the people of this country, making sure that we have great schools and universities, a strong healthcare system, an economy that's built around well-paying jobs, so that when people put in a hard day's work, they can support themselves and their family members. And Donald Trump and millions of Americans saw him describe his plan for healthcare. He said he had concepts of a plan. And so his campaign has been one that's run on division, oftentimes on hate. And so Kamala Harris is not only going to be a president who will help try to bring Americans together, but create opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, Congressman, certainly that's part of the conversation. When I talk to voters these days, I've even heard some discussion of, it used to be you could vote for the person, regardless of the policy. Now I'm having to think, do I just vote for the policy and I don't like the person? All of that goes into it. But you just mentioned having concepts of a plan, and that was a big deal in that debate a few weeks ago. But I know just a week or so ago, just recently, the town hall that Vice President Harris did there in Las Vegas on immigration, the vice president really didn't say how she would do anything different than President Biden has. And I think that's where some of the critics are coming out, or the people who are exploring say, do I really know what the vice president's policies would be? How would you answer some of those folks?
Well, immigration is one of the thorniest issues that you can talk about in American politics. People have very strong opinions on it on all sides. And they don't have to guess what she would do, because she, in fact, has been vice president for 4 years and has worked with President Biden on the issue of border security and immigration. And also, most importantly, I think people have to ask themselves whether they want somebody like Donald Trump, who talks and talks and talks about doing something, or uses issues for political reasons to divide people, but then when it comes down to it, doesn't actually want to solve them, just wants to campaign on them. And that's what we saw President Trump do when he instructed Republicans to basically knock out what was the most promising border security compromise and immigration compromise that we've seen in a decade in Congress. And so I think Americans can take a look at Kamala Harris's track record, and they can also look at what Donald Trump has done in scuttling what was the most promising border security and immigration plan, and also doing things like separating families and demagoguing against immigrants, buying into conspiracy theories and spreading conspiracy theories about Haitian immigrants eating dogs and cats. That's not the kind of president we need in this country.
Yeah, and Congressman, I know Vice President Harris, when talking in that town hall, said there's a false choice between a secure border and humane immigration policy. So it's certainly, I think, something, especially those independent voters or these undecided voters are leaning into. Tell me about maybe this outreach that the Harris campaign is doing toward the Latino community. I had heard a recent, I guess, New York Times poll that said that Hispanics are maybe in play here, that there's not as much support toward the Democratic Party as many would expect. And maybe why is that?
Look, there's no question that Vice President Harris's campaign is going to every part of the country to talk to Latino voters, Hispanic voters. They're spending more money than any presidential candidate has ever spent targeting the Hispanic community and trying to talk to them, listen to them about what they care about, what they want to see for the future of this country. And, you know, I'm from Texas, and one of the big challenges that we had for a long time was making sure that because a lot of the races were decided in the primary, oftentimes the Texas Democratic Party didn't go in there and talk to Hispanic voters for the general election. That has now changed under President Biden and under Vice President Harris. And so she's going everywhere, to Arizona, to Nevada. They've got 150 staff members in Florida, in every part of the state, 20 offices. So they're leaving no stone unturned to talk to Latino voters, but really to talk to all Americans.
Congressman, on the topic of hurricanes, 3 hit Florida this year. That's the record. We're praying there's not a 4th this year. But obviously, Texas deals with hurricane damage as well. What would you say to people, because there's been this divide about whether or not the federal government really is responding the way they should in terms of Federal Emergency Management Agency, in terms of spending money? Certainly, Vice President Harris is saying that's just not true, that they're not responding to states in need like Florida.
No, this was a very quick response by Vice President Harris and President Biden, trying to reach out to all the mayors, to the governors, to local officials and communities, make sure that they were taken care of. She has made sure that these communities are getting taken care of. And again, this is just like the conspiracy theory that Donald Trump spread about Haitian immigrants in Ohio. He's outright lying and spreading dangerous information about what's going on. And it's not helping the effort on the ground. It's not helping the recovery. It's not helping people find food when they need it. It's not helping them recover their property or file insurance claims. All he's doing is trying to divide people, create resentment and confusion for his own political gain. And that's what he does on issue after issue after issue.
All right, stay with us. The final hurdle for the Stadium of the Future and how city and team leaders feel about unanimous approval from the NFL. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
The Jaguars in the city of Jacksonville have a new formally approved 30-year lease and a stadium renovation plan that has been in the works for years. All 32 NFL voters voted in favor of the plan that City Council approved this summer. On a virtual conference call, I asked Jags owner Shad Khan about the timing of this deal, since it's the 3rd stadium agreement in the past couple of years for the NFL. He called the vote one of the 2 most important days in franchise history.
First was obviously when they got the franchise, and the second day was when the city council voted, for the extension of the lease and extension of the stadium. And I really believe that, because it removes the uncertainty. I mean, we can say what you want to say. People believe what they want to believe. So I think this is, more proof. And then as we have the development on the east side and really the growth, for me, we want, the area we're doing with the the stadium, the Four Seasons, the museum. I mean, we want that to be the jewel in the Jacksonville crown, frankly, and we're headed that way.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about the stadium and how it's going to impact our community, but what exactly would it look like when it's renovated? Let's take a look at what we can expect. One thing to look forward to in this Florida heat, a protective canopy that is going to provide some shade. According to the Jaguars website, the transparent cover is going to reduce heat retention by 70%. All in favor, say aye. The stadium will also offer more seating options from the sidelines up to the highest seats. Renovations also increasing stadium capacity from 62,000 to 71,000. That's going to allow for more attendance during events like the Florida-Georgia game as well. And then there will also be some new communal spaces at the stadiums like interactive social bars, more local food options and retail venues along with scenic lookout decks overlooking Jacksonville as well. Also going to be wider concourses. They're supposed to be 4 times wider than the current ones, allowing for more movement and space for special events even. Finally, there will also be an outdoor nature park. It's going to feature subtropical landscaping on the elevated mid-level of the stadium. So next on the timeline, construction begins next year. Capacity reduced to 25, further reduced to 26, all of that. But the Jaguars plan is going on right now. Okay, we're working to bring you a conversation with Debbie McCarcell-Powell, the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate in Florida. Also planning to hear from Senator Rick Scott, who is vying to keep his seat. This Week in Jacksonville airs each Sunday morning at this time. I'm Cat Justice. Thanks for watching on air on Channel 4 and the CW17 and online at news4jax.com.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.